Hello again, this is Dr. J.C. Smith and Warner Robbins talking again about the medical monopoly of healthcare in the United States and how bad and ineffective and costly it's been. The coronavirus is a good example of how the medical world just has no idea what to do. They eliminated the ounces of prevention that could have been helped to improve people's overall wellness by using natural healthcare means such as homeopathy and chiropractic and nutrition and naturopathy and diet and yoga and tai chi, all these healthy habits that you can develop as opposed to doing none of this and relying upon drug shots and surgery. It's not the answer. One thing that I didn't mention in my previous was the fact that the original issue that the AMA had against chiropractors wasn't about back pain, even though today manipulation is proven to be twice as effective for 90% of the cases than anything the medical world has to offer. But the original chiropractors weren't looking for the cure to back pain. They were talking about how the brain and the nerve system controls physiology, how your organs and muscles function. You know, that maybe was too high-tech 120 years ago, and it's still too high-tech today. But the chiropractors are the first ones that are talking about how this nerve energy controlled function. And they had this interesting little concept called the safety pin cycle, where the brain sends nerve flow to organs or muscles, and that's fed back afferent type of circle pin cycle. And if that's broken through a subluxation, in our case, a misalignment of the spine, then you're going to have health problems, not just back pain. And what was interesting is this high-tech concept was too high and too technical for the medical world at the time because they were still hung up on the germ theory. And they were still doing bloodletting and things like that didn't work, but that's all they could do. And so what was interesting, though, is that here, 120 years later, the medical world has finally caught up to chiropractors. Here's an illustration of an article that was published in 2014 by Kirk Erickson, David Craswell, Timothy Verston, and Peter Gianros. That's a tongue twister. It's called Health Neuroscience, Defining a New Field. Now, tell me, is this not the same concept of the old original chiropractic? It is exactly the same. They're just updating it. They never mention chiropractic, but they're talking about the same damn principles we are, that interference to nerve flow will cause health problems. You don't have to be a rocket scientist or a brain surgeon to understand that. It's been, more research has come out. Dr. Heidi Habak down in New Zealand has this interesting book called Reality Check, where she's talking about the same sort of thing, and neuroplasticity and how your brain adapts to such things. So this, even though it's more or less emerging as they talk about, no, it's been around for 120 years. But today what I want to talk about also is the medical war in workman's comp. I have been here 40 years, and I can count on one hand the number of cases, workman's comp cases I have. Even though chiropractic is a legal benefit, again, there's a virtual boycott. We never get referrals from MDs. We never get referrals from workman's comp attorneys or from the insurance industry. So it was interesting, though. Back in the late 90s, I was asked by my chiropractic association to attend the Georgia Workman's Comp Educational Symposium. They have it once a year. That year, it was held down at beautiful Jekyll Island. If you've never been there, it's beautiful, beautiful golf course, everything on an island. And we were there in April, where there were no bugs, no humidity. It was wonderful, 72 degrees. And the goal of the seminar that weekend, according to Governor Barnes, was to improve outcomes and lower costs. And since low back pain is the leading disability in the workplace, in the military, and in society as a whole worldwide, obviously chiropractic can play an important role. But I did some homework before I went down there and found out that we were seeing less than 2% of the low back cases, which was nuts because by then I had written my first book, How to Avoid Back Surgery, and I talked about three huge studies that were done in the early 90s. One was done in Britain called the Mead Report. And again, they touted that chiropractic manipulation was better than drug shots and surgeries. The second was done by Prawn Manga, PhD, Ontario, Canada, Ministry of Health. Same thing, chiropractors were best. And then in 1994, the U.S. Public Health Service was authorized by George Bush Sr. to start an agency for healthcare policy and research to develop best practices in the major areas of healthcare in the United States, because there were none. It was a free-for-all. And the 14th guideline was on acute low back pain in adults. And again, chiropractors came out on top. This incredibly historic moment was headed by 30 famous spine researchers and professors and everybody who's involved in the back pain business of all disciplines. And they came down with 3 proven treatments. And this was a 2-year study. They scoured the Library of Congress, over 10,000 papers. And they came down to 3 things. Again, ice or heat for home care, NSAIDs, over-the-counters, instead of narcotic pain pills like Oxycontin and Tramadol and hydrocodone, which you know the active ingredient is heroin, and spinal manipulation. Well, talk about a feather in our cap. Well, as soon as it was known, the AMA and the device manufacturers and the Orthopedic Society filed an injunction against its release. Huh? It took 6 months because everyone lawyered up, and finally on December 7th, 1994, a federal judge removed the injunction and it was released. What was most interesting was then how the media reacted. Because again, the media has a war against chiropractors because again, all their reporters are MDs. All the morning shows were much different. ABC had the worst. They had a lady MD on there, didn't know up from down about back pain. She goes, well, when I have somebody who has a back problem, I tell them to lay in bed and use hot packs and take drugs. And exactly against what the commission had to say. It was amazing. She knew nothing. But yet, all those people listening to her thought that was the essence of the report, which it wasn't. But the most really outlandish was on the Today Show. Matt Lauer was interviewing Dr. Art Uline, who was their medical expert on most issues. He was an uppity MD from Harvard. But to his credit, he went through the report exactly. And so at the end of it, Matt Lauer said, well, so if you have a back problem, you should go see a chiropractor, right? And he goes, oh no, I would never send someone to a chiropractor. Huh? You could hear a pin drop in that studio. He said, I'd send him to an osteopath. Well, wait a second. The osteopaths had given up manipulation back in the early 60s to get integrated into the medical world. So I wrote a letter to that SOB saying, how dare you? Chiropractic has been taking the shots across the bow forever to preserve this healing art that you people wanted to destroy in your attempt to contain and eliminate the chiropractic profession, quote unquote. And finally, when it's given its due, what do? You misinform the public. Talk about fake news. It started with that crap. Anyway, so more studies since then have come. Evidence-based research and random control trials, all these official ways of saying what's best for back pain, see a chiropractor first. MDs are inept, they're not trained, their methods don't work. Again, they're the ones who created the opioid crisis because most opioids are prescribed for back pain. They're the ones that are for cancer and post-surgical and trauma and things like that, and that's fine, that's less than 10%. But most back pain is from musculoskeletal, most opioids, of which back pain is number 1. And look what happened since then. The opioid crisis has just gone crazy. It's like the coronavirus thing. It's just escalating exponentially. And all because these guys are out of control. What was most interesting is that in response to this opioid crisis, just 2 years ago, President Trump had this commission on combating opioid drug addiction and the crisis, and they actually recommended chiropractic. Governor Chris Christie from New Jersey was the chairman of this commission, and he actually said that chiropractic care was, quote, proven to reduce the use of opioids. But what was interesting is last year they had an opioid summit in Atlanta, And everybody who has anything to do with healthcare, especially in the opioid business, and showed up. And what was most interesting, there were 164 events on the schedule, but not one event presented the proven benefits offered by the chiropractic profession to reduce opioid consumption. There were 320 speakers listed, but not one was a chiropractor. As Trump might say, the system was rigged. And it's also been rigged in workman's comp. So, since I've never gotten any referrals to speak of, I did a little investigation, and I found that I did a Freedom of Information Act in years 2013, 14, and 15. In those 3 years, in Georgia workman's comp, those 3 years, there were 11,064 spine-related injuries. That cost the taxpayers $281 million just for medical care. This does not include lost wages, long-term disability, and blah, blah, blah. Attorney fees, settlements. It was just medical care. And the average case was $25,000. On the other hand, again, chiropractic is a legal benefit. Yet of those 11,064, we saw a mere 219 cases. And that total cost was less than $500,000. Huh? So when I found this information out, I sent an email to the CEO of the Georgia State Workman's Comp Board, and I said, what gives? Why this inequity? And the thing is that since back pain is so out of control and opioids and surgeries don't work, a lot of progressive states, such as California, New York, Ohio, Michigan, Oregon, Washington, progressive states have come up with guidelines, and they follow basically what the Agency of Healthcare Policy and Research said, is that do conservative care first. Long before you do drug shots and surgeries, patients have to be referred for conservative hands-on care, which is chiropractic, physical therapy, massage, acupuncture, things like that. And they're getting great results. They're reducing the cost in half, getting people back on the job in half the time and half the cost. I mean, there's no doubt that's the best way to go. So I wrote to the CEO and saying, what guidelines do you use? And she wrote back saying, we don't use any guidelines. Huh? I wrote back, why not? And she said, because our stakeholders, MDs, don't want them. No wonder they don't. They've got a cash cow. So anyway, when I went to that the Georgia Workman's Comp Educational Symposium down at Jekyll Island, that was the most enlightening. That's when I really realized what the hell's going on with Workman's Comp. Again, they don't follow guidelines, they follow the money. And any small businessman can tell you, Workman's Comp is the worst insurance. It's the most expensive. They're horrible to work with. They railroad everybody into back surgeries, especially here in Georgia. But the first day I was there, they had the outbreak groups. And I was in the doctor's group. There were insurance people, labor reps, and lawyers. Anyone who had a stake in Workman's Comp was there. 400 people. So I was in the doctor's group, and they weren't there to talk about how to lower costs and improve outcomes. They were there to play golf and tennis. They were dressed in their Bermuda shorts and their T-shirts and all that sort of thing. And the first thing they did is they gave themselves all raises, and they were ready to go play. And I said, wait a second. We hadn't even been there like 30 minutes. I said, aren't we going to talk about the governor's goal to lower costs and improve outcomes? I said, who are you? That's the first time I've ever been there. I found out later that they voted not to ever have me come back because I made too many waves down at Jekyll Island. And so they gave me 5 minutes, and I talked about the Manga report and the HCPR report. And then they said, okay, fine. And they went play golf. Well, the next day they had the plenary session, which is all 400 meet in one big room. Usually at legitimate symposiums and conventions, they have a speaker of great renown sharing her words of wisdom. Well, not at this place. I say they were there to play. And so the director got up and said, well, we don't have a speaker, so anybody can talk for 5 minutes. And 2 vendors got up before me and gave their sales pitch, and they sat down. Well, then I got up. And I had a lot to say because I think all of this information was on top of my mind, and I was ready to tell the story, speak the truth to the powers to be. And So I started talking about the research showing that chiropractic was faster, safer, cheaper, quicker, better. And within 3 or 4 minutes, the most astounding thing happened. In the front row was the lady orthopedic surgeon who had been the head of our group the day before. And she didn't know I was going to talk, and there she was in the first row. So she stood up, turned to the crowd of 400 people and said, "We don't want those chiropractors who think they can cure diabetes." Huh? You could hear a pin drop in that room. She was there to humiliate me, but she ended up humiliating herself. Because I said to her, I said, "Ma'am, diabetes is not a workman's comp injury. Will you please sit down?" Huh. Anyway, then I continued talking. And after about 10 minutes more, I had a lot to say. Give me 10 minutes, I'm not going to get a lot out, as you now know. But finally they said, "All right, that's enough. Sit down, shut up." I mean, they had one foot out the door. And then the only African-American man in the room. This man was as big as that doorway. He was a big man, muscular, and he had alopecia, that skin whitening problem that some have. And he raised his hand from the back and he says, "Can I say something?" I said, "Yes, sir, you can say whatever you want." He said, "When I played football for the Detroit Lions, Atlanta Falcons, it was chiropractors that kept us going." So he waved his finger at those naysayers and said, "I suggest y'all shut up, sit down, and let him tell us how he can help us." Well, that broke the ice. Then other people said, "Yeah, we want to send people to chiropractors, but the doctors won't refer, the attorneys won't refer, the insurance companies won't approve it." All these hurdles and barriers that people face to get to see us. And so after 45 minutes, everyone had their say, and that was enough. Then they all went off to play golf and play tennis. And then the only man in the room that was wearing a business suit, he came up to me at the very end. He said, "Son, let me teach you the facts of life of workman's comp in Georgia." And I thought to myself, well, this ought to be good. And it was. He said, "You're talking to the wrong people. These are the for-profit guys. And the way it works, the more they pay for surgeries and hospitalization and rehab and blah, 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 the more they can charge in premiums to make up for it." And of course, the attorneys, they want to send everyone in for as many back surgeries as possible because, again, the bigger the claim, the higher the settlement. So it's a big racket is what it is. And with that information in mind, I went to my local state senator at the time, who then became the next year Governor Sonny Perdue, who's now the Secretary of Agriculture under Trump. And I told him the same story. And he was outraged. "I can't believe they're not using the cheapest mousetrap." He says, "When I'm governor, things will change." I said, "Great, we're going to have a friend in the governor's mansion." Well, when he got in there, things did change. Instead of seeing 2%, we now see 1%. And then to make matters worse, in the end of 2016, the legislature passed a workman's comp reform bill. And they gave a few extra bucks to injured workers and such like that. But before then, there were 3 panels that every employer had to put up on the workplace for injured workers. One was all MDs, the second was called a conform panel, in which you had to have a chiropractor on staff. And then the third was just another motley group. So what they did in 2016, the medical monopoly went to the state legislators and called in all that money they've been donating and lobbying money for years. They called it in. And unanimously, the legislators eliminated the conform panel. So suddenly chiropractors were out altogether. And to this day, if you go to the Workman's Comp website, type in the word chiropractic in the search organ, and you will not find it. We will not be mentioned. So consequently, in 2018, the last time I did the check, chiropractors only saw 83 patients. Now, they usually average around, there's like 3,000 injured spine-related injuries in workman's comp a year. We're seeing 83. Yet every guideline says we're faster, safer, cheaper, quicker, better. And so what do you call that? I call it racketeering, and it's called illegal monopoly, illegal boycott, and yet I fought tooth and nail. So I filed an appeal against the State Board of Workman's Comp, and I sent it to the Inspector General's office. Oh, it didn't get better. I got a response saying, "This is from the head Inspector General in the state of Georgia." And she wrote back and told me, "Workman's Comp is not part of our jurisdiction." Huh? So she said, "Send it to the Workman's Comp Inspector General Office, which I have now done twice, and I have yet to get a response. They're covering this up so bad. I even sent this information into Atlanta Journal-Constitution newspaper, because they do exposés, investigative journalism once in a while. They did one on sexual abuse by MDs 2 years ago. Last year they did one on abuse in old folks' homes. I said, all right, maybe they're ready to take on this, because there's a lot of money to be saved if they were to take on the medical monopoly. Again, $281 million in a 3-year span. That's about $90 million a year. Chiropractors could cut that in half if patients had access to us, which they legally do, but they get railroaded to drugs, shots, and surgeries. That's where the money is. So this is a problem that we face not only on the state workman's comp level, but on the federal workman's comp level too. And that's another story I'll tell you in a minute. Thank you.